And so in May, I took a new position where now I'm the environmental program manager. So basically I'm over our BMP program and any other environmental issues that come across the table with the Forestry Commission, whether that's endangered species or ecosystem services or wetland stuff. So basically anything environmental gets run through our section. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about best management practices, about how we proactively protect water quality and site productivity and basically environmental quality while still actively managing these forest lands across the state of South Carolina. I'm going to start a little bit, and Dr. Latham touched on this. I thought he was going to steal my thunder, but luckily he just kind of breezed over it. But just kind of a little overview of South Carolina forests. So like he said, we have 2/3 of the state is forested, and most of that is privately owned. Obviously the biggest risk to forest land these days is development, more so than agriculture, like it was in the past. And with these private landowners, we're talking about everybody from small private landowners that may own 5 or 10 acres, all the way up to industrial private landowners like Weyerhaeuser or investment companies. Probably a lot of y'all's retirement is in timberland. John Hancock Insurance, TIAA, has a lot of timberland holdings. So there's a lot of industrial timberland and then also a lot of small private landowners and larger private landowners. Of all those acres, there are almost 13 million acres. Most people think that most of the forests in the state are pine plantations. That's kind of what you see when you drive down the road, mainly because pine trees grow on hills and the roads are usually on the hill. But you can see about half of the forests are a pine type and a half are hardwood, which surprises people. And only a quarter of the forests in South Carolina are pine plantations. But what's even more surprising is 50% of the wood products that comes out of the woods of South Carolina comes from that 25% that's in pine plantations. So it's an extremely productive forest. It is ecologically valuable as well, but it is a huge contributor to the forest products. And what's helped over the years as we've lost a little bit of forest land, and we've fortunately stayed pretty stable with that 13 million acres of forest land, but the genetics of trees have improved phenomenally. And you can see, I'm not going to read my slides, I know y'all can read, but you can see this natural stand of timber. If you just let your trees kind of come back with whatever comes in, you're growing about 1 ton per acre per year. And that number, it may not make sense to you, but you can kind of see relationally, as compared to if you planted trees in 2010, you're going to be growing 15 tons per acre per year. And this isn't genetically modified. This is just straight up crossbreeding, taking seeds and pollen and breeding. It's not genetically engineered or genetically modified. It's just improving genetics. And so now on less acreage, we can grow more trees, which is really really big. And as we go forward, this is 2010, and so now in 2019, the genetics are even more improved from that. So we have very, very productive forests, and that's something we hear a lot in meetings is people get concerned. You see a clear cut or you see a logging operation, and people think we're cutting all the trees. Pretty soon it's going to be just a denuded landscape. It's going to look terrible. And you can see this is from a fairly recent presentation up at NC State that my supervisor went to. And the colors look a little wonky, but the tall grass, you can see it's planted pine, natural pine, pine hardwood, and then upland and lowland hardwood. And the tall bars is the growth, annual growth rates. And again, the numbers are big. It's more the relationship. And then these smaller bars here is how much we're removing. So you can see in the planted pine, it's growing far more than what we're removing. And it's true across all forest types. And here you can see totals. This is pine growth, pine removal, and then hardwood growth and hardwood removals. So because of the improved genetics, because of improved management, and because of the conscious effort of the forest industry and land managers, we are growing far more timber than we are removing annually. And that's true. This is across the whole southeast. So it's not just South Carolina, but it's a southeastern trend. With all these removals and with all these trees growing, we have a very healthy forest industry in the state. Every single one of these dots is a mill of some sort. We have almost 100 primary mills, and those are the mills that take the whole tree from the woods directly to the mill and generate a product, whether that's boards or telephone poles or fluff pulp for diapers or cardboard for Amazon boxes. Those are primary mills that are taking tree-length logs and turning them into a product. And then we have 767 secondary mills, and those are mills that then take that board and turn it into flooring or turn it into a boat or window framing or whatever it is. So we have a tremendous amount of mills and a lot of trees. We have a very healthy forest industry in the state. And this is a study they did a couple years ago that shows just how big of an impact it has on our state. They determined that forestry has a $21 billion economic impact to the economy of South Carolina. So it's huge. You can see how many jobs it supports. It's a huge export commodity out of Charleston. But just because it's a healthy industry and just because it's something we want to encourage, the industry and the state and the loggers are not out there just going crazy doing whatever they want to do. That's sometimes the perception, and sometimes people point to, well, this is such a healthy industry, nobody wants to regulate it, nobody wants to slow it down. But that's simply that's not the case. And so in 1976, the Forestry Association came up with this first, on the far left, this first guidelines for silvicultural activities. And essentially what it was is just very basic recommendations on how to sustainably harvest timber. It was very kind of simple, straightforward, but in the late 80s, the Forestry Commission hired a full-time forester to develop a best management practices program to make sure that we were protecting water quality and site quality while we were out there doing timber harvest and all forestry operations. And so in 1994, I'm not sure, we published this manual, which is still the manual we use today. Hopefully we're updating it this year. But if it works, it works. And in that manual, we have specific guidelines for every forestry, not every, but most forestry practices that there are. From tree planting, site prep, prescribed burning, harvesting. We have specific guidelines of what we recommend you do to sustainably harvest your timber and protect the site. Since '94, we've added a couple supplemental manuals, braided streams, which we fortunately do not have to deal with up here. That's just on real flat sites. And then biomass harvesting, which I'm sure y'all are familiar with. There was a big push that we thought biomass was going to explode in the state, where they take trees, chip it up, and for the wood pellets for energy. And there's been a couple mills move in, but we were, again, trying to proactively get ahead of that market. And with that, we were more looking at soil and making sure that not too much material was getting removed from those sites. So this is kind of our suite of books, and I have a couple landowner guides to BMPs out there that have kind of the basics. I don't have time to go too in depth tonight, but those are the guidelines that we have out there today. And so you can see up there at the top, this is how BMPs are defined in our state statute. So you can see it encompasses a lot of things: water, air, sites, aesthetics. So there's a lot of stuff we cover in best management practices. But these 4 bullet points are kind of day-to-day what we're looking at. We're trying to protect water bodies, and that's kind of the foundation of our program. We're trying to keep dirt out of the creek, is essentially what our end goal is. We don't want anything happening on the ground that's forestry related to impact the water or anything off-site from where that activity is taking place. So to do that, we really have to minimize soil disturbance. Obviously, disturbed soil and exposed soil, when it rains, that washes downhill into the creek. So if we can minimize that disturbance, and if there is disturbance, stabilize it, we really shouldn't have any major problems. And then we protect sensitive areas. We obviously don't want equipment running up and down stream channels. We don't want it running in and out of the buffers right there along the streams. So these are kind of the 4 main ways that we protect water quality. And as a program, so like I said, I'm over the program, and we have 3 BMP foresters scattered throughout the state. There's one in the Piedmont, one in Coastal, and one down in the PD region. And how we focus our program is we look at training, pre-harvest planning, and our courtesy exam program, and then we have a monitoring program, which kind of tells us how we're doing if we need to make any changes. And so training is a huge component. We have a really robust logger training program called Timber Operations Professionals that the Forestry Association runs. And we do a half a day of that training that's just strictly dedicated to best management practices. And so this is just kind of a foundation, a groundwork. As y'all can imagine, people that are used to being outside, foresters, loggers, they're used to be outside doing. And so when they've got to sit inside for 2 days, not that much necessarily gets absorbed in that class, but it just kind of lays a baseline. We only had one person openly, loudly snoring, so they're mostly all conscious, but sometimes it does happen. But it just lays that baseline foundation where at least everybody knows what best management practices are. And like we were talking about earlier, this really is integrated into the forest industry to the point now where it's just normal operating procedure. When I started 11, 12 years ago, there was a few people that still were kind of holding on, well, this doesn't apply to me, we've never done this before. But this has been around since the late 80s, so we're now, 30 years, more than 30 years of them dealing with this. So really, it's pretty much normal operating. It's nothing that people are really pushing back against anymore. We do a lot of pre-harvest planning with loggers or foresters. When they go buy a tract of wood, they'll call us up and say, hey, I've got a creek out here. Do you mind coming and looking at it? Tell me what you think. Do I need to leave a buffer? Can I cut up to it? Can I cross it? We've really learned that preventing problems is a whole lot easier than trying to fix problems on the back end. Fortunately, with forestry, you can fix most of the problems, but there is going to have been some impact. You're going to have some dirt in the creek. Or if you cut all the trees along a creek, you can't stand them back up and have shade tomorrow. It's going to be a long process to rehabilitate that site. And so really that pre-harvest planning and that training is our best tool to try to avoid water quality issues. But we also have a courtesy exam program where our foresters go out and look at active logging jobs. And we do look at some site prep and some tree planting, but the bulk of the sites that we look at are harvesting because that's really kind of where the main impacts usually come from is a harvesting operation. So we go out and we do a wall-to-wall inspection of the track. We'll go out there and look at the streams, we'll look at skid trails, we'll look at haul roads, log decks, basically everything on the property. And we'll look at what they've done so far. Usually we'll come up on a job when they're either just starting or they've been out there a week or two. And we'll look at what they've cut and we'll look at the rest of the track too and see if there's anything that might be of concern. And so we'll go walk it and we'll go back up to the deck and talk to the foreman or the owner and say, hey, there's a creek back there. Are you planning on crossing it? And talk through if they are, how they might avoid problems, or if we see a problem, how they can fix that problem while we're out there. So if we do come across something, because it does happen, for the most part, our logging jobs are great. We've got really good loggers, we've got good foresters, but every once in a while there is an issue. And so obviously our first priority is to try to get that fixed as soon as possible. And in most cases, let's say I did that 11 years and I only had one case where the logger and the forester wouldn't work with us to get it fixed. Most every time they're trying to fix it as quickly as they can because it's in their best interest. Nobody wants to do the wrong thing. And so most times we can just get it fixed. If it's bad enough, like you can see in these pictures, all this dirt has washed into the creek. Once it's to that point, we have an agreement with Corps of Engineers and DHEC where they're our enforcement arm. We don't have any enforcement authority at the commission. We just got to smile. We can ask real nice. But sometimes we do need that heavier arm to come in. And so they can levy fines. They can require people to go to training if necessary. And then we have a really good working relationship with the forest industry. Because these guys out there cutting wood, they don't get paid when they're cutting the trees down. They don't get paid until that wood goes into the mill. And so if we have an egregious offense or if we have somebody that is repeatedly doing the wrong thing, the forest industry is really, really sensitive to BMPs because of these third-party certification. I'm sure y'all have heard of SFI or FSC, or if you haven't, when you buy lumber or on your coffee cup, there's usually a label on there. It's a certification saying this product has been made with sustainably grown and harvested timber. And for them to be able to put that label on there, their wood has to be harvested in compliance with BMPs. And so that's another way with the logging community that we're able to have really high compliance with our BMPs, because again, it's in the logger's interest to do the right thing. So every month we have a report that goes out that looks like this. I know it's hard to read, but this basically states every logging job we've looked at that month and if it's acceptable or unacceptable. And this goes out to over 100, almost 150 people across the state. It's published on our website. It's all public information. And so these are obviously, a lot of these are made up names. There's a couple real ones in there. But it's just an illustration. This does go out. So again, as a logger, you don't want your name up there where everybody can see that you've had an issue. So this goes out monthly. I lost my titles up there. But then every 3 years, we do a monitoring study. And basically what this allows us to do is see how well our program is working, or if there's areas that we're clearly not explaining well enough, or we need to focus more on. And so we go out, like I said, we survey about 150 to 200 sites that have been harvested within the last year. And you can see these numbers show a huge success for our industry. Like I said, the foresters, the loggers, the mills, everybody is behind this, and everybody believes that it's an important part of this business. So you can see our last one is in 2016, and 97% of all the sites we looked at, they did the right thing on. So yes, there is 3% where they had a bad crossing, or maybe they cut trees they weren't supposed to, but almost 100% of the time, these jobs are being harvested in a manner that's not affecting water quality, it's not affecting site productivity, it's not negatively impacting the environment around them. So again, this is really a testament to the logging community and the forest industry, because ultimately they're the ones on the ground doing the work. This is always interesting, and again, the colors don't show it well, but you can see public landowners, public land ownership since 1994 has been 100% compliant. So ever since then, of the job, not that we look at 100% of the jobs, but of the jobs that we've looked at, there's been no issues with BMP compliance on public land. And this next one, the industry land, again, it's been very high and at 100% the last couple surveys and in the past as well. And then large landowners, again, more than 1,000 acres, are very high as well. So the smaller landowners who maybe only harvest timber once in their lifetime, or it's somebody that, you know, they inherit a bunch of land and they want to cut the trees, and they sometimes tend to push the loggers to do stuff that they're not supposed to do. But this illustrates that large landowners, industry, and public lands is extremely important. It's taken very seriously, and there is an effort to stay in compliance with these recommendations. And a lot of times loggers get about, you know, we hear it all the time, you know, they just don't care. They're just out there raping and pillaging. They could care less. They just want the money and they run. And if you think about it, a logger, is it in their best interest to do that? Most of their business comes word of mouth. So if you buy a tract over here and just destroy it, do you think they're going to call up their neighbor and say, oh, hey, man, I got a logger for you. If you need trees cut, you should call him. No, they're going to have a hard time finding another tract to buy. And the same thing with SFI now. If they booger up a tract bad and get a reputation, if the mills are not taking wood from somebody, that's going to be the first person they cut off. And so really, and then again, too, if they go cut a tract, it's in their interest in 15 years for them to be able to come back and thin that tract. So if they're not harvesting it in a sustainable way, they're not going to have trees to come back and harvest. If they clear cut a site and rut it up and compact that soil where the trees grow slowly, that means it's a longer period of time before they can come back and harvest again. So these guys, I mean, they're out there working harder than I work, harder than probably most of us work, and they really are trying to do the right thing. Every once in a while we get 9 inches of rain in 2 days and something goes horribly wrong. But for the most part, everybody across the board is really trying to do the best they can. And so our BMP program, like I said, it's been around more than 30 years. It's a model program where there's several states across the southeast and across the country, really, that have modeled their program after ours. Tim Adams, who's my supervisor, was actually the one that created the program, and they won an award, I think it was in 2000, from the EPA. And so it's very demonstrated that it's been a successful program. And over the years, we've been able to develop really good relationships across other state agencies and with the forest products industry as well. So like I said before, we have really good relationships with DHEC and the Corps of Engineers and DNR also, and obviously the Forest Service. And then we really started working heavily in the last couple of years with the Timber Producers Association, which is the association that represents loggers and contractors in the state. And then also the Forestry Association, and we're also involved in, SFI and a couple other certification groups. So we've really been able to kind of reach into a lot of different areas to try to pull everybody together to get everybody kind of working on the same page. And it's really helped us that the Corps of Engineers and DHEC has basically said, they've allowed us to handle forestry issues. So most of the people in DHEC and the Corps are not foresters. They're used to looking at development tracts. And so when they come out to a logging job, the lens that they view things through is very different. And so over the years we've worked, and we now handle, they've allowed us to handle all forestry activities, which has really worked out well across the state. So we've been very fortunate in that regard. And like I said, with the monitoring studies, we believe that this is an effective way to protect water quality and environmental quality while still allowing that working forest and supporting that healthy forest industry in our state. And it's something that I've talked to several people across the state. It really doesn't matter where, that are feel that trees should not be harvested, or would rather see just see a natural forest and not see a clear cut or a thinning. And the reality with that, and we've seen it around where we live too, is if that ability to manage your forest as forest land and earn some income from that goes away, there's a lot more incentive to sell that for development or some other use other than forestry. Ag is not as attractive anymore, and so it's mainly development. So the value of that land is so much higher in development than it is keeping it in forestry. And so as long as people can harvest timber and regain some income from the property, they're more apt to keep it in forest land, whereas if there's heavy restrictions placed on it, it's more likely that they're going to look to development or selling it off to somebody else. So with that, I wanted to get through a little bit early so I had time for questions. I don't know how much time I have left, but